in this session of the Infosys Procurement Confluence, which is a forum where we bring together senior procurement leaders from across the globe to tell us about their thoughts on various burning topics and issues, for example, sustainability, risk management, and so on. And for today's session, we are privileged to have Thomas Udesen, who is the Group Chief Procurement Officer for Bayer, the global life sciences company, whose motto is health for all and hunger for none. And that's also the mission and vision which inspires and the entire procurement team led by Thomas in Bayer. And Thomas is a very well-known person. He very visible on social media. Thomas he has long years of experience in procurement in Johnson & Johnson and with Bayer for the last 8-9 years. And he has an MBA from some of the prestigious institutes in UK. And also, he is the co-founder of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, which aims to, along with Bertrand of Henkel, the CPO of Henkel, it aims to bring more than 1 million SPP ambassadors across the globe to drive the sustainability agenda and embed sustainability into the procurement and supply chain functions. With that introduction, Thomas, welcome you once again to our session. And I straight away jump into the discussion. Thomas, what are your views in terms of how companies and especially the procurement organizations and what is the role that they play in the sustainability agenda that needs to be driven for the companies and as well as for societies?
First of all, thanks for inviting me, and also thanks for the focus that you and the Infosys team is having on this topic. Of course, it is true. It's a very, very important topic. And my opinion is that generally, we are not seeing enough happening across the world. And whilst, of course, there are good practices, and some of them are also visible in helping our community in, role modeling, showcasing what is possible, I would say that most organizations are actually failing behind on what is required, and even in many cases, some of the commitments that they have made. So those companies, making sure that the spending that they control, that is being shifted to more responsible practices is, mission critical. If we don't get the procurement function, those 1 million ambassadors engaged in making better decisions, some of these very unfortunate events that are unfolding around us will continue, and as scientists would predict, are also going to accelerate. And I think this is all a scenario that we are desperately, all of us, trying to avoid. So companies are important, but frankly, so is public spending. Because if you also look at procurement organizations across governments, you will see a similar pattern where there is not enough action, not enough clarity, lots of maybe good intentions, but it's not substantiated with traction. And that's really already, almost 50% of the spend. And it would, for all of us as citizens, be nice to know that the tax money that we are paying is being, used in a responsible and sustainable manner. I would say, though, that again, up until now, we talk about the corporations, and there's around 15,000 organizations who have signed the UN Global Compact principles, which is, the universal 10 principles around how do you actually make responsible practices that are also lived throughout the supply chain, both around ESG, so the environmental, the social, but also the governance aspect. And when we then, of course, talk to procurement practitioners, we do recognize that it's not all that people have committed to that is really happening once you look under the hood. And I think that's that's why it's time to roll up the sleeves and stop, let's say, a lot of the talking and start walking. So thanks again for advocating this, because we have a lot of work ahead of us, as you know.
So, as one of the pioneers in this space, in terms of leading this for your procurement organization, how was your journey? Did you have any challenges when you were starting off this journey, and how did you go about it? What were the, say, key defining moments of the journey?
Yeah, I think most of all of that happened long before I joined, and I think this is, of course, the nature of Bayer, right? It's a company that has been around for 150 years. The fact that we have had plastic businesses, we've always been very energy intensive, and with that also this topic of preservation of resources and sustainability has been around for decades, multiple decades, in fact, and I think in a way that shows itself by the fact that we were one of the first companies to sign the UN Global Compact principle back in year 2000. We were also one of the first companies that recognized that when you talk about supply chains and the sustainability practices, we consider that pre-competitive. It's not an area where we should all be fighting with each other. We should be collaborating with each other. And already back in 2011, so was that 11 years ago, we co-founded both the organization Together for Sustainability, which is in the chemicals industry, as well as the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, which is more focused on the RX and the pharma industry. So those were two major organization industry collaborations that since then has grown in size and importance and influence, and of course we still see those as key vehicles for moving forward. We had a refresh of our sustainability strategy back in 2019, and I think the responses from many observers is that that's one of the boldest and most comprehensive sustainability strategies that one has seen, also from industry. It talks a lot about the role we have towards the communities in which we operate, but there's a few other features which are quite unique. One is that our CEO is also our Chief Sustainability Officer. We were one of the first companies who then joined SBTi, so the Science Based Target Initiative, and we were tagging ourselves at the 1.5 degree scenario of the Paris Climate Agreement, but also that we have introduced some advanced features like the compensation of everybody in Bayer, and the bonuses that are paid are dependent on our sustainability performance, and we are introducing levers like a carbon tax for projects when we are assessing should we go for one solution versus the other. And I think they are very advanced practices that we have now been practicing for quite a few years. And of course we have new ideas, and we will constantly evolve as we learn moving forward.
We have these situations where our procurement stakeholders, right? So they typically have budgets and so on, and they would like the procurement team to go for the lowest cost provider or the lowest cost supplier. And and whenever, most of the times or a lot of times, the impression is, and as well as sometimes the reality is, that the upfront cost of something which is more sustainable may be more than what is looking cheaper but is not so sustainable. But then the stakeholders and then the finance team also has a pressure that you need to bring savings and you need to be within budget. So how was that, those kind of situations? How did your team tackle those, and do those situations still occur, or the organization has reached the maturity that those conversations are far more easier now?
I mean, one of the parallels I think is helpful for us as procurement practitioners is the quality transformation that happened back in the 80s and 90s. And also here, there were many efforts across quality organizations to introduce better practices, making sure that quality was good and a constant focus across operations. And many of the same arguments were introduced back then, that it's going to cost money and we can buy poor quality, so why should we have a good quality? The conversation changed, right, in a way that the minimum standards were raised, so that over the decade of work, it didn't become a question of whether you had good quality, because everybody had good quality, but you would sort of make sure that you didn't end up with low quality. And I do see a parallel that, yes, maybe there is an investment that needs to happen, as I talk about the carbon prices that we're introducing for our CapEx. Maybe there are levers that needs to be introduced for the transition period. But at the end of the day, and hopefully in years, not too many years ahead of us, we will not be talking about sustainable practices. We won't have those dialogues you described, because we will be talking about procurement and then unsustainable procurement, which of course is very unpalatable for all organizations.
What would be your guidance to organizations who are still on that journey? Is it more about education? What exactly would help them in that transition? Which you have already done that transition, but several organizations would need to do that or are in the process of doing that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it sits with us really as individuals and as professionals. Because in a way, you are your conversation. If you can explain what are the consequences behind your decision to go for a more responsible solution, which may carry a short-term premium, admittedly, then most people will also understand that. So the more comfortable we are, the more capable we are to have a educated conversation and help influence the stakeholders around us, the more likely we are to be successful. So a lot is really on our own awareness of what is the impact that we have in our supply chains. What is it that is of value to the company, to the reputation of the organization you are part of, by doing it differently. And if you have that dialogue gradually, step by step, stakeholder by stakeholder, you will also be able to win them over. But if you are not capable of having a content-driven conversation, then of course limited changes is likely to happen.
And this extends to the suppliers as well, because typically the suppliers want to take the easiest path to getting an order, which in a lot of cases is the lowest cost path, because that's what is the common impression, that by giving a low price, it'll be easier for the suppliers to get orders. So there would be change management which you would have done with the supplier community as well, and explain to them in terms of what is your ask and so on. How was that journey? Did it take a lot of time, and how did it go about?
Yeah, it takes, of course, a lot of time, and I think also the way that you position your partners, your suppliers, has a important influence whether they take this seriously or not. So our philosophy with suppliers is it's one of long-term partnership. We have certainly reduced our portfolio of suppliers so that we are now with the right companies who share the right values, who also understand that Bayer is a very attractive customer, that of course has strong requirements when it comes to how they act, but also how they create value for us in terms of innovation and other dimensions. So we've had a constant dialogue with our suppliers over the last many years, and this has in a way been very consistent as far as our expectations are concerned. And whilst we have this integrated in our supply management, we have repeated ways of engagement. We have supplier days where we also make sure we share what is our priorities and why. We have this clearly articulated in our code of conduct. It's also applicable, included in our contracts. And of course, the fact that we work very actively, and I would say also very visibly in industry collaborations, also makes it very known to our suppliers that this is a minimum requirement. It's almost an entry ticket to doing business with us. You're also aware that most procurement organizations have various degrees of segmentation across their portfolio, and we make sure that if you want to be key and strategic in our portfolio supplier landscape, that you also understand that we have minimum expectations around your sustainability practices. We want you to be green, which means it's an EcoVadis score of 45 and below.
Now coming to your favorite topic of sustainable, the SPP program. So, would you like to tell us a little more about that?
Well, I think the origin is a bit what we talked about, right? That there continues to be a lot of talk and not enough action. And we were in a way in different forums where I also have the pleasure of working with like-minded CPOs, leaders of procurement organizations who are also very keen to make sure that things are being pushed forward at a much faster speed than what we have seen. So it's one of the things that we are all quite aware of. And at the climate strike, which took place back in October 2019, we were inspired to also say let's really start doing something about this. How do we activate our family of procurement practitioners out there, the 1 million people who largely control world trade? 8.7 trillion is one of the most recent estimates. We believe we are around 1 million people in our tribe, and let's try to make some principles all centered around the UN Global Compact. But how do we make it actionable that each of us individually can now act on those UN Global Compact principles? And we made the pledge, which then captures 5 principles that we say is important for us as procurement. And we sort of launched that, and through that, thankfully, we reached a very large group of ambassadors. We are around 8,000 ambassadors from 142 countries now. And the consistent message from the dialogues that we have all the time is that we experience very significant gaps across our tribe, the procurement community. And they sort of come in 4 different ways, but they're very consistent. And one is around knowledge, where everybody feels that this complex topic of sustainable procurement and is a very complex topic with so many dimensions. It's very difficult to keep track of the latest news, particularly with the very disrupted world that we are living in. So there's a real need for knowledge. How do I do this practically? Which template would be helpful? What methodology would give me the answers? And how do I calculate my scope 3, etc., etc.? So that's one area. They also reported big gaps when it comes to leadership, where whilst everybody recognizes we can do things different and should do different things, they don't enjoy the support from their leadership. That could be procurement leaders, or it could be other executives in the organizations that they operate. So a lot of dialogue around how do you build your conversation, how do you make sure you have the right influencing skills to also have a knowledge-based conversation. And then they talked about support gap, lack of role models. How do we reach out to people if we have a question? It's difficult to find a community of like-minded people who have the same problem and who may even have solved it. So they need support and infrastructure, community. And then a consequence of this is that there's a broad confidence gap. So people don't have the courage to start moving. I think we have lived in an age of very punitive external view on companies. If you don't do it perfectly, you are not doing it good enough. And that has led a lot of organizations to, in a way, state of paralysis, that they are not even prepared to take the first step because it's not the perfect step. But we have to wait forever. So those are the gaps that exist, and they're really very universal across organizations, private procurement, public procurement, across all geographies. And of course, we want to change that. That shouldn't be like that. We know that the knowledge exists in our community. There's not much that we haven't already been able to address. We just need to channel knowledge free of charge to the procurement colleagues we have out there in the world. So we are launching chapters. We're making sure that the knowledge is available at, as you said, spp.earth, and we have a community that's being built also around LinkedIn. So I think many are, of course, also familiar with institutions like the Khan University, and in a way of maybe making knowledge available to the public for free. That's the same philosophy we want to do here. It's for procurement, by procurement, it's for free, everybody is invited. So we are creating those chapters where people from a, let's say, like-minded background, has a chance to come together. And we are currently doing it on 3 dimensions. One is the country dimension. So we are launching chapters across the world where you can meet people who have the same country-specific challenges. Then we have industry chapters where people from your industry can also come together and say, what is it that's so unique to us? But you can also join other industries to learn, how are you dealing with certain challenges. And then we have topic specific. So some of them are around the ESG agenda. But to your point, one could easily imagine that you want to go into also some categories. We have a packaging chapter as well. So this is where each individual, as a procurement practitioner, we see that you have a unique experience. One is country, one is industry, and one is topic. And we want to have this seamless access to the latest information without having to be bogged down by browsing, your internet endlessly to get the answers that really do exist.
What would be your advice to organizations and procurement professionals who are just starting the journey, or who are, say, still in the lower end of the maturity curve, so to say? Most organizations would have done something, but I think they are in different stages of maturity.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to sort of boil it down, I would say, first of all, don't go alone. There is this African saying, if you want to move fast, you go alone. If you want to move far, you go together. And we have to go far. So organizations who are trying to make their own questionnaires and, in a way, have not joined an industry collaboration, I think are in a way missing the point and taking on too much work than is not necessary. So don't go alone. Join an industry collaboration. If you don't have one, create one. Find some friends who have a shared supply chain, who then you can talk about the challenges that are shared and find a way of collaborating. Then I think also this notion that we can't move until everything is ready. So this perfection that exists in many organizations, I think it's really, in this particular topic, it's the enemy of progress. It paralyzes so many organizations and individuals, and we need to be comfortable with this ambiguity and also have honest conversation around imperfections. We all know that our supply chains are vulnerable and they are not perfect. We are all working very hard to make them better and have discussions, but I think we need to accept that it is a journey, and the journey will only start if we have the first step, and that we can do all already today. And then I think the recognition that it's hard work. You will only reach those aspirational targets and the future that we all desire by having focus, but also making sure that you have sufficient resources allocated to really work on these things. It's not an afterthought. It's not something you do on top of everything else. It's something that requires leadership mandate, focus, resources, because otherwise the operational reality that we talked about is just going to take over, and we will not see the progress that we require.
Do you think it needs a change in the way the procurement organization is structured, or does it need a different set of procurement managers to drive this kind of an agenda, or it's the same people but with a different orientation or training? What is your experience and what would be your guidance?
I think you will have impact you can have impact with many different organizational designs, operating model, and certainly we can have it with our existing 1 million procurement practitioners. The fact that people are reaching out from 142 countries saying, I see there's a problem, I want to learn, I want to become part of the solution, is evidence that we have all the right people, we have the right mindset. I think it is around, again, fixing those gaps, making sure that we build our own vocabulary, we educate ourselves, we have positive influence where we need to have positive influence, we have engagement with our suppliers, we make it not a nice to have, it's a must have, we build the courage to drive more difficult conversations also at times, tap into the methodologies, the tools that already exist, don't try, you have to reinvent what somebody has already done. Good enough is good enough. So I think we can, and I think everybody is really important. It doesn't matter whether you are a CPO or whether you are sitting on the front line negotiating a deal on conveyor belts, as you mentioned. We make big decisions every day that impacts the future of next generations, and we have an amazing power. And I think here as Superman, I think it was Spider-Man's uncle, he said, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think this is us, that's procurement. And there's nobody who is better positioned to do a great job in transforming the economy, how business to business is conducted. So it's our privilege, it's also our responsibility. And that's why it's great to be in procurement.
That procurement has a central role in driving the sustainability agenda. But if you see that in majority of in a lot of the organizations, procurement is not really seen it. It could be that the procurement teams don't see themselves that way, or they don't position themselves that way, or the organization doesn't see that themselves. What is your view? I mean, is it a problem in the way procurement has not positioned itself rightly, or we need to reposition ourselves, and then people will say that, oh yes, these are the people who are making all the key decisions regarding, say, sustainability, and hence, that's the prominence it needs.
I think I had a boss once who said something really important, and that sticks with me, is that you are your conversation. And I think if we are not educating ourselves to have the very strategic conversation around where should procurement be, and what's the value add, and what's the role of business practices and supply chains, then of course not much will happen. And I think we are then a victim of our own lack of, I guess, strategic foresight. And so I think we cannot put this blame on anybody other than ourselves. It starts with us. So we can, and there are plenty of evidence, we can build the knowledge, we can activate our community to have a bigger impact. And I think also the people, our procurement practitioners, they have an additional lever, which again I would encourage them to also look at, because if you have an organization where your input isn't appreciated, or your desire to work more responsibly and have this agenda on top, if that's not understood, you are not in the right organization. Leave. Find an organization that gets it. There's plenty of organizations who are on this journey, and then of course eventually organizations that doesn't get it, will simply, not have access to the talent, and they will struggle, and maybe they will cease to exist, which is sort of the natural evolutionary thing that needs to happen. So, don't accept that you are being asked to operate in a way that's against your values. If you believe in us as procurement being in a way, guardians of global sustainable supply chains. If you don't care, I guess, keep doing whatever you are doing, but you're the one who one day will have to explain to your own grandchildren or the next generation of, what did you do when we were faced with the biggest challenge of our lifetime? Were you part of the solution, or did you sort of check out and do something that served yourself?
Any personal, say, anecdotes in terms of how you are able to do this in your personal life as well, while of course you are doing that in Bayer? What are your thoughts in terms of how one can be more sustainable in the, as an individual, as a householder, and what's been your experience in that?
Yeah, I think that is true. We have a enormous impact in our everyday choices as a consumer, actually, on what do we buy? How do we make sure we buy things that are, having recycled content, or potentially, derived from bio-based materials. So that's something that we are also trying to do much more as a family. Certainly how we eat. What is a carbon footprint on our eating habits? How do we commute? I have for years had a 100% electric car, and whilst of course that has its own also challenges, it's a very tangible first step in the right direction. How do you live, commute, eat? I think those are the personal things that each of us can do, and you don't need to wait for that. I have also the pleasure of 2 teenage children who, of course, are very conscious of what we are faced with, and I think also a good reminder that it's to a large extent also for them that this is happening. It's for the next generations. We will probably only see the beginning. You talked about the weather. I'm sweating here with 32 degrees in Germany, but it's likely to continue. All evidence suggests that it will continue and it will gradually get worse. So they will have the brunt of this, and we owe it to them to change our behavior.
It was a very engaging and very nice discussion, and very insightful thoughts from you and ideas from you as well. So thank you very much. This was very enlightening, and hopefully the procurement community and the SPP community will find it very useful. And individually, I mean, I'm much more motivated and excited now about the agenda. And both me and my team, we will see how we can become much more active in furthering the SPP agenda from here onwards. So thank you very much for sharing both the professional insights and some of from your personal life as well. It was great interacting with you.
Thanks for talking to me. Thanks for making it important, and I look forward to our journey together. It's still the beginning.